Greetings friends, my name is Pavel Stenmach and I'm glad to present for you the new episode of our daily wrap-up series. Spring is coming, let's rejoice. No one was waiting for this spring like Ukrainians. After all, it carries warmth. We survived in a terrible winter which became threatening from October 10th. From October 10th, every 2 to 3 weeks, dozens of Russian missiles and later Iranian drones flew into our territory. They flew to destroy our energy infrastructure, to turn off the lights in our homes, to destroy heat generation. But the Russians did not succeed, because the light of our eyes illuminates our victory, because the warmth of our hearts is enough for us, and for our neighbors, and for our cats too, soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. Winter was a time of severe tests of Ukrainian stability, endurance and solidarity. We rallied and passed this test with dignity. Russia sought to use the winter factor as a weapon, to deprive Ukrainians of heat by destroying critical infrastructure, to break their will. It failed. Once again, Ukrainians felt what international support and solidarity means. We are grateful to our partners for each generator and each blanket. This winter has strengthened our preparedness for crisis. The Kremlin's gas war against Europe has also failed. The EU embarked on an unprecedented reduction in its dependence on Russian energy carriers. Spring is a time of hopes and victories. We will beat the enemy on our land with new zeal and energy.
Today there was no shortage in our energy system. There were no power outages across the country. Thousands of people have been working every day to achieve this result. They restored what could be restored after the Russian strikes. They protected the energy system. They helped cities, communities and people. Of course, the threat still remains. Of course, we will fight and defend ourselves. We will definitely endure no matter what the enemy does. I thank each and everyone who contributed to this task.
Paradoxically, Putin did Ukraine a huge favor with missile attacks on civilian sites. This did not allow the war to pass into the status of somewhere far away, as it was in 2014-2021 for many Ukrainians. And as it is now, I think some Europeans believe. As a result of the missile strikes, society once again rallied and put aside strife that would have turned deadly. We have paid with hundreds of civilian lives for their understanding that war affects everyone, that war is common to all corners of our country, and ultimately for our viability as a society, which is a prerequisite for victory. We now have a strong desire for victory. I emphasize not peace, but victory, and when the people have such a position, so will the Ukrainian government and our eventually allies.
We endured the hardest winter in our history. We were cold and dark, but we were indomitable. Together with us, partners stood side by side with their help. The EU also won, which despite Moscow's slaughter, also did not freeze without Russian gas. One piece of advice for Russia: suffocate with your gas and choke with your missiles. Dmytro Kuleba, Minister for Foreign Affairs, in Facebook.
But we not only survived the winter, we have been standing for a year. Despite the fact that Russia has been preparing for a full-scale offensive since 2014, ever since the invasion of Ukrainian Crimea, when it began its aggression against our nation. However, our country survived because our people did not give up. Having invaded Ukraine, Russia has made a fatal mistake. Ukrainian unity has become the very foundation of Ukraine's strength and resilience, which inspires the rest of the world. Ukraine not only defends but also energizes the values of the free world, and every nation must remember, freedom is not free and should not be taken for granted. Ukraine, along with its partners, will make every effort to make 2023 the year of victory over Russia's aggression. We can liberate all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territories if Ukraine gets enough military support. Russia is now a global pariah. Russia has spent tens of billions of dollars and decades building its system of global influence. It has ruined all of it in 1 year of failed invasion. Ukraine has always been and always will be part of Europe, as President Zelensky emphasized. For many years to come, we have secured this. It is time to begin EU accession talks this year. Ukraine has brought the EU together like never before. Ukraine is defending European values for future generations. Ukraine ensures that Europe will be whole, free, and at peace. Ukraine defends not only itself but also European freedom and the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, international peace and security.
Для України насправді
A year ago, on the 5th days of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine applied to join the European Union. This was the first step in obtaining the candidacy. We have done a tremendous fast job and have secured candidate status for Ukraine. This year we should reach the decision on membership negotiation for Ukraine.
Ukraine has always been Europe, and it defends its right to be Europe in the fight against the Russian invasion. No other people made greater sacrifices for the flag of united Europe than we, Ukrainians, on the Maidan. Ukraine defends Europe by restraining Russian expansion on its soil. The EU understands this and therefore actively helps our struggle. Ukraine's support united the EU like never before. Ukraine breathed new life into the European idea.
Both Ukraine and the EU, we share the common goal of ending this war based on respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And we therefore support Ukraine's peace formula initiative and will actively work with you, with Ukraine, on the 10-point peace plan. And we also back this idea of a peace formula summit in order to launch this plan. Last June, the 27 EU member states decided to grant candidate status to Ukraine, and this was a major step. Since then, Ukraine has made considerable efforts and progress, especially on judicial reforms and fighting corruption.
We are extremely grateful to all of our partners for their assistance. Ukrainians will always remember those who have lent a helping hand in times of great need, because without European and American support, we would not have survived. We will not win this war. War for our country. After all, Russia has never considered us a real state. But it turned out that despite all Moscow's desire to make us a part of its history, we are a separate country, who decided to return home from the Russian zone of influence to the European community. You believed in us, recognized us as your own and accepted. Since February, the European Union has provided Ukraine with 50 billion euros. As well as shelter for millions of displaced persons, various types of weapons, visa-free transit, promotion of exports, introduced simplified trade with Ukraine and anti-Russian sanctions, already 10 packages. This is what investments in a common future look like. Vladimir Putin needs more repression in Russia. The people are beginning to guess that not everything is so clear and good in the war against Ukraine. Soon the number of Russians killed will reach 150,000, which means that the Kremlin will have to conduct a new mobilization, but not among the rural population and regions far from Moscow, but already in larger cities. And the larger the city, the greater the probability of protests. Internal Kremlin polls obtained by the Russian publication Meduza showed that the share of Russians favoring peace talks rose from 32% to 55% between July and November 2022, before and after mobilization. Over the same period, support for continuing the war among respondents fell from 57% to 25%, and the new wave of mobilization will cause an even greater drop in support, especially since even now it is not possible to distribute weapons everywhere.
Мобилизация в Чечне,
Mobilization in Chechnya is basically impossible since the Kremlin cannot distribute weapons to people with whom it fought yesterday. The Kremlin has been fighting the underground for 20 years, disarming the entire Chechen people, and now they cannot mobilize in Chechnya. In other regions, this is easier.
Сегодня Путину достаточно ограничены.
Putin's resources are rather limited. When he can oppose today to Western aid to Ukraine is cannon fodder, which they are constantly gaining. As you know, mobilization continues now. It hasn't finished yet. For February, they had a plan to mobilize 50,000 without announcement.
And the reserve in Russia is getting smaller. After all, 2 waves of emigration have already taken place in the last year. The first immediately after the start of a full-scale attack, and the second after mobilization. According to various estimates, up to 1 million people left the country. Yes, it is much less than Ukrainians, but there are no hostilities on the territory of Russia either. And you know, there are still those in Russia who may be against the actions of the authorities, but for now they are silent. But when they talk, it can turn out very badly for Putin.
В России, по крайней мере, на уровне
In Russia, at least in the Federal Security Service, options are already being worked out. They are already working on an alternative option when Ukraine reaches the borders of the 1991 year. They understand that they will have turmoil, which means they need to prepare a transition of power.
Also, Putin must use repression. In December 2020, the government modified the law on foreign agents to make the label potentially applicable to almost any Russian citizen, as well as strengthened penalties for non-compliance. Over the next year, Russia would use the foreign agent designation against almost all of Russia's top independent media outlets and the journalists who run them, severely constraining their ability to operate inside Russia. It is not clear whether Putin was actively seeking to crush any sprout of dissent in preparation of his invasion. But since February 2022, the Russian government's restrictions on political liberties have grown yet more severe. The first indicator of the post-invasion crackdown's severity was its speed. Within 2 weeks of invading Ukraine, the Russian government passed new laws making spreading false information or discrediting Russia's military forces and their actions in Ukraine crimes, carrying a penalty of up to 15 years in prison. It is also important to take away the truthful information at once, for in the authoritarian region, information is controlled in the first place.
Russia is a democratic federation.
As you can see, out of the mouths of babes speaks the truth. So Russia must take a course away from imperialism and destruction. It would create a better future for Ukraine and for Russia itself. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Subscribe to our channel and goodbye.